Diane, I'm listening to a podcast, Black Lodge Trivia Night. I've never heard so many game aspirations in my life.
All right, welcome back to Black Lodge Trivia Night. This is Art, and we are kicking off 2026 with something a little more downplay. We're going to do a little bit of a Bookhouse, boys. We're going to ease into the new year. Happy New Year to everybody. Obviously, that means we're down in a Matt and a Patrick. They were invited to the Stranger Things finale screening in Hollywood. I like the number 11. I like the 1980s, but alas, I was not asked to go. So here we are. I'm going to do this a little solo. And what we're going to be doing today is, if you know anything about the channel, we did a sort of espionage, Cold War little adventure inspired by John le Carré's The Looking Glass War. And when I was sort of getting that together, I looked at a lot of espionage games. So I thought we would walk through some of the espionage games out there. And again, this is not an exhaustive list of games, and this is definitely not going to be an exhaustive review of the games in this list. But I just wanted to sort of give you a brief overview of what was out there in case any of these looked interesting. And the one we're going to start with, in no particular order, is Spycraft, the 1960s. Now, this is a source book. I don't have the actual rule book because I'll get into that in a second, but Spycraft, the 1960s, takes Spycraft, which is a D&D 3rd edition, 3.5 edition OpenGL kind of take on the action espionage role-playing game. I knew that I wasn't going to be running it in D&D 3rd edition, so I didn't buy the rulebook. But I will say the 1960s Decade book is just a wealth of information. Gives you just a general overview of everything going on at the time. Sorry, my voice is already starting to go a little behind the scenes. This is my second time doing this. I got pretty far into the first one, and then something crashed. And so I'm a little nervous of what's going to happen this time. But you can see it gives you background on China, Cuba, East Germany, United Kingdom, Vietnam, West Germany, all the things that might be going on in the 60s. This is a great overview. But what we'll do is look at 148. Let's just jump down a little bit. But just so you can get an idea of 106, of what this 150. So, you can see it's classic D&D level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This is all the stuff is why I knew I wasn't going to be using it. Because I didn't want saving throws. I didn't want armor class, things like that. But you do get perks like D&D 3rd edition. But yeah, so for a lot of people of a certain age, I think this is one of their favorite ones, because I think obviously D&D 3rd edition has a lot of supporters. I mean, as far as D&D goes, I enjoyed it, but you can see special talents, +1 department bonus to all threat ranges of cultures, gather information checks. So it becomes 1920, becomes an 1820. So you can see right there, you're getting very much a classic D&D sort of vibe to how this works. And I'm sure, like I said, for a lot of people, this is one of their go-to ones. So Spycraft definitely has a lot of fans out there. And I think, again, I'll try and have links to all of these in the show notes to Drivethru or wherever you go, itch.io. There is a 5e version of an espionage game. It's called The Spy Game, and I'll have a link to that as well. I don't know if it's Spycraft updated to 5e or if somebody else took up the mantle and went for it. So, but yeah, there is a 5e espionage game out there. Now, I don't own that because I absolutely knew I wasn't going to be running anything in a D&D sort of clone, and the Spy Game didn't have a 1960s specific book for it. But yeah, I mean, this game's still out there if you prefer 3rd edition, 5th edition, both exist. So you can absolutely run espionage games in your favorite flavor of D&D. Everybody knows 4th edition is not anyone's favorite flavor, so I don't know if there's a 4th edition book, but there we go. All right, so again, quick overviews just to show you what's out there. Next one I'm going to bring up is, Tuxedos and Trenchcoats for Savage Worlds. Now, this is one I almost went with. I'm almost disappointed that I didn't run it in Savage Worlds, my John Le Carré game. Savage Worlds has a reputation for being sort of very pulpy. And for some reason in my head, I want to rail against that. I'm like, no, I bet it doesn't have to be that if you don't want it to be that. It's such a interesting, smooth toolkit that I want to believe that if you wanted to have a vibe of this kind of game, more investigative, more subtle, more cerebral, whatever it is you associate with like that John Le Carré style espionage game. And if you're familiar with John Le Carré, you know why that's not an action-y kind of situation. So what this does is it puts in the work. Because Savage World is such a flexible and easy to work with toolkit, I feel like I probably could have come up with a lot of this if I really wanted to. But I don't need to, because they give you the archetypes, the races. There's not going to be races, but they're going to give you, like the tropes, like, hey, what kind of game are you trying to play? Like, globe hopping, spy versus spy, martinis and stale beer. This is the one I was sort of looking at, like a stale beer trench coat style. So here they even address that. And I feel like, because I feel like that's here expressly written down, I feel like they had it in mind, and I'm hoping that they feel like it could work. But it sort of does the conversion for you, like, creates training packages, classes, gives you like skill lists to get you started using. I think they sort of tweak some of the skills. Yeah. So like academics becomes something else, like athletics is a core skill. Where's a plus? Oh, plus deception is a new skill. So they didn't even tweak that much, actually. But yeah, so it puts in the work. It does the thing to get you, because that's the thing, right? With the toolkit, you just need to like, okay, this fireball spell is now going to be a hand grenade, right? Like they do functionally the same thing. And so that's kind of the genius, I think, of Savage Worlds. Yeah. And, come up with new edges, tactical driving, legendary cover. Which, again, they just take the tropes of the espionage genre and they shape it to the underlying Savage Worlds mechanics, which for me are great. And again, I'm still disappointed in myself for not going this route and just seeing how it worked. I mean, a lot of stuff is going to be based on like the guns, the action, stuff like that, which was not where I was leaning toward, but what are you going to do? So there you go. That's the next one. Let's get to the next one on the list. And that is Classified, the role-playing game of covert operations, a retro clone of The System, originally designed by Gerard Christopher Klug. Apologies, I am going to butcher that. But the reason why it's The System capitalized is because that system, I think, is James Bond 007 RPG from the 80s from Victory Games, which for a lot of old-time gamers, kids who grew up in the 80s, I grew up in the 80s, James Bond was their RPG of choice. Like, that's still the one that set the bar that has yet to be beaten. I confess, I've never actually played James Bond. I almost wish I always wish Matt and Patrick were here, but Matt, I think, snagged a copy of James Bond and one of the supplements. I don't know if he still has it, but at one point he grabbed them, and I don't know if his intention was to run them or he just was intrigued by it. I don't know what it was, but anyway, so this is like a D100. It's got, like one of the things that did jump out at me is it's got this sort of old school, tricky way to like determine success in a skill check, so you're looking at tables and difficulty factors and, and it's not that crazy. It's just when you have to multiply 8 by 24, right? Like, then you start to get a little weird. But it's got a point buy system for character creation, which I know a lot of people really like. You could argue that Savage Worlds kind of has a point buy. GURPS is a big point buy kind of RPG. We'll get into that later. Rookie agent, special agent determines how many points you get. So, it's got a lot of good things like that. It's very it's going to be crunchy. Older games often, were not leaning into like story-driven, narrative-focused kind of games. That feels like a slightly more modern development in the RPG industry. So this is going to be, crunchy. It's going to have some heft to it. But it's going to cover, it's classic for your eyes only almost cover there. It's definitely, going to lean into that Martini Bond style, a little more action focused, but that's all fine. You can run, in my mind, I feel like you could run whatever you want by just focusing on aspects of the game. But yeah, so it's very much like an old school, crunchy D100 take on the espionage genre. And if you're looking for a way to get the James Bond RPG PDF in a modern format, classified is the way to go. This is, again, the James Bond RPG, and from my understanding, with the James Bond filed off. So yeah, so classified is the next one on the list. Let's see what's up next. Open with, here we go. The next one is Cold City. Okay, so Cold City is, for a lot of people, when I was digging around on the interwebs, Cold City was their current favorite for a lot of people. Cold City does, I think, a lot of smart things. The city in question is Berlin. The time is around 1949, 1950-ish, like a little bit of that Third Man vibe. So it has a very specific, narrow focus. And I think that is a good call. Because of that, it's got a really nice section. Oh, you know what? When I have them, I'll try and show. I've got Cold City. This is the first edition. You're seeing second edition on the screen. But you can see right here, a game of hidden agendas, trust, and monster hunting. Now, I know I have my quirks. I don't like aliens in my science fiction. Like I've got my weird things. A thing that comes up a lot in espionage games is monsters, the occult, things like that. I definitely was not looking for that in my game, but it is something that comes up a lot. I don't know if it's just it's a hook that a lot of people like, so why not? But it's very much a part of this setting. But I wonder, I'll get into the mechanics in a second. Is it hard to pull out to extract the monsters from the setting? But if you go like right to the first page, you're seeing monsters. So like it's very much front and center. The concept is, it's post-war Berlin. There's the four controlling powers of the city. There's the French, the English, the Americans, and the Russians. They each got like a sector of Berlin. And so they're sort of dealing with each other while they're also dealing with like some real Cthulhu-y dark monster hunting. You can sort of get an idea here, right? Some of the interesting things this game does is like every player character has to be of a different nationality. So you can only have one American, one French, one British, and one Russian. Now the Russian part is where it kind of falls apart. I know there's like this existential threat that you're dealing with. But at this point, like we are essentially in a type of war with Russia. So we're not going to be like, hey, one more ride. Yeah. Trust me one last time. Sure. That's not going to happen. But, you give it the benefit of the doubt, because one of the interesting things about this game is that each player character has a couple of hidden agendas that they're working on, which could diametrically oppose one of the other players. They have like a personal hidden agenda, but they have a national hidden agenda. And there's two ways to play the game. They call it closed and open. Closed is you keep those agendas close to the vest. Only the GM, which is the controller, I think is what they're called, they know what everybody's agendas are, but nobody else knows. So you could suddenly find one of the other player characters at the table acting kind of strangely in a critical situation because you don't know what their agendas are. The open way is everybody knows what they are, and so you can sort of use that to build more interesting storytelling. The, character creation, the setting, all that is very collaborative and sort of like a storytelling kind of game that we have these days. Everybody's working together to, flesh out the setting and provide details. And at the end of the day, you end up with like a dice pool system. Let me bring that up. Again, monsters. Like I didn't want that at all, but there's a lot of good source material here that might make it worth just, if you're looking for a pure espionage game, to do the legwork of just extracting. And part of the reason why that might not be hard is because, like I said, this game is like a dice pool game, and it's a D10 dice pool game. And when I was looking through it, it was kind of funny. Because they were like, yeah, if like, you need a bunch of D10s, if each player could have like 20 D10s. And I'm like, what? Like, who's got like 100 D10s or whatever? Some of them could be like a specific color, so you can tell which one goes from which pool. And you're like, okay, D6, it's easy to end up with like 140 D6 dice, but D10s are a little less like that. So if you're running a multi-session game, each group starts at 5 dice. The groups are the Berlin, the cold, external enemies, internal enemies, monsters. So that's how many D10s you roll from each pool. And so and they're abstract in a way that I thought was really interesting. Like the cold is just general world espionage political events. Like this takes place, say, in 1950s Berlin. But what if something flares up in Southeast Asia, proxy war style, between Russia, China, the United States, whatever, French Indochina, whatever it is, would that impact how like the Russian and the French agents look at each other across the table? I don't know. But it could, and that's what the cold dice do. And if the cold dice are a certain way, then it impacts like sort of the game as a whole. Like you sort of add points to a tension pool or something like that. The base mechanic is you take your D10s, and it's often an opposed roll against the controller, and the controller rolls D10s. You look at, say, the highest die the controller rolls, say it's a 7. That becomes the target number you're trying to beat on your D10s. So I think 7 and above counts as success. So you roll your pool of D10s, and every 7 and above counts as success. And you can end up with like 20 dice because you're pulling from different resources to build up your pool. That's sort of the core mechanic. Again, there's a lot of, I don't know why I lost my, there we go. There's a lot of stuff here. Gives you background on like what it's like to live in Berlin in the 1950s. Give you notable places. So again, because it chooses a very specific, some of these are made up because of the new thing, but it gives you like a breakdown of the sectors, Berlin itself, some of the key points. But what I really like about this is because it's so focused in its setting, it can really bring that to life in a way that like the 1960s Spycraft book is global. So if you sort of need to look up like an encyclopedia, like, oh, I need a little something, a factoid, it can give it to you, but I don't feel like it's going to breathe life into those things the same way. So that's Cold City. This was a second edition. The book I have is a first edition. I don't know if the second edition physical books are out yet. It was a Kickstarter, and they did a 2-book version, a Cold City Hot War, I think. And the Hot War is what it sounds like. No more spies, no more stuff. Like it's outright war between whether it's the countries and the monsters or the countries themselves, or I don't really know because I didn't look into that. I was hoping at some point if the physical second edition Cold City comes out by itself, maybe I'll grab that and have it on the shelf. But there you go. Cold City. So, okay, good. So we made it this far. Last time I can tell you my camera froze. It seems to be holding up okay, and I don't know why it froze. Everything seems okay. All right, so I'll keep going. Up next is, I can bring it up real quick, Cold Shadows. Now, for some people, this is also one of their choice Games, Cold Shadows. This game, when I was doing my research, a lot of people on the interweb said that this one was the most John le Carré. And I kind of get what they're going at here. Cold Shadows, I should probably saying like Gallant Night Games. Again, there'll be links to everything in the show notes. Cold Shadows is really interesting because it's very much the vibe of Cold City, like that, gray Le Carré, no monsters. It's very sort of like a storytelling style of game. It's pretty it's pretty rules light. And I think the way it might be like a D10. Oh, interesting. So yeah, again, it's very collaborative. You can see like step one, the director. So you even, I'll get into that in a second. So I think the core mechanic is you might have like a couple of D10s that you're trying to use to beat a certain number. And what you have to decide is sort of like a gambling mechanic. Because what you're doing is you're taking your dice pool and you know what you have to beat. And you're like, you know what? Like I have 7 dice that I'm rolling. I think I can beat that in 4. And so then the other 3 dice that you're not going to use, you can use to sort of gamble. Okay, so the target number for all risks is 10. The number goes up, never goes down, and you get dice from virtue, name, blah blah blah. So and then you come up with a wager. Right, here we go. Wagers are the real backbone of the Cold Shadows system. They make the game fun. So usually when your character succeeds, he has a rank or effect of 1, but there's ways of increasing effects. But anyway, so basically, you can use the wagers to sort of take narrative control. So if you have a very specific story you're trying to tell as like a game master, this might not be the system for you. But if you really want like a really collaborative game, this one's probably going to do it. And then the other thing that this game does that the others don't, we started to get into it here, is it's really about creating your agency. You don't need to play MI6, or maybe you're like your station, whatever it is you want it to be. It's really about creating your station. So the director could be your station chief. What kind of person is he or she? And then, the agency itself has assets, it has aspects, it has different things you can choose to sort of shape how your agency works. Now, I don't know. There's a way to have wars between the agencies. So I don't know if the idea is part of the character creation. Each person creates their own agency. So you could have like, the way like the CIA and the FBI might butt heads, or MI6 and MI5, like don't always, or, like the way the British and the Americans, like cousins across the pond, like the way the CIA and MI6, didn't always get along. But yeah, so that's a lot of what this does. It sort of has like this, it's about the agencies, not always about the spies. And the reason why that was intriguing is because, at least in like John le Carré fiction, half the problem is your own team, right? Like half the problem is the people that are also British that have their own agendas that you're butting heads with that create the problems. Or the fact that, they're selfish, or the fact that they don't give you everything you truly need to know. That it's that kind of thing is part of, that sort of le Carré fiction. So this game captures that in a pretty rules light, story focused, narrative control kind of game. And yeah, it's definitely one to check out if that's kind of what you're. There are other rules light games we'll get into, but this one is pretty unique in that aspect. So, all right, so that's Cold Shadows. So let's go to the next one. Next up is Covert Ops. Bare bones role-playing game of espionage and paramilitary adventure. So as you can see right here, boom, right off the bat, this is an action movie. You got, not quite Splinter Cell, not quite James Bond, not quite Rambo, like it's just going for action and shit sploding up. So this is not trying to be, not trying to hide what it is. This is another D100 system. Now they say this is based on D100 Lite system. So if you know the D100 Lite system, you sort of have an idea of what this is. I didn't, but it is pretty D100 Lite. What you're trying to do is, a skill check is basically taking your, am I thinking of the right one? No, that's 00. Yeah, so we'll get to that in a second. I'm spoiling my own thing. But yeah, it's basically it's a D100 system. You're trying to, this reminded me a little bit, I don't know if this is true, like you have like your pre-rolled scores, but I don't think you need to do it. But it's basically a D100. It's very, so I don't want to say it's generic, but you can see like academic, detective. These are leader, the martial art. These are not like highly specific to espionage, like pavement artist or whatever. But it is meant to create like an action, more like a Tom Clancy novel, or not the novels, more like the Tom Clancy shows, I guess. Jack Ryan, for instance, where like by season 2, he's, running around with, SEAL Team 6 doing ops when he used to be an analyst the year before. But yeah, so, and again, in my personal journey, as I was looking for stuff, this didn't jump too high on the list. I didn't spend a ton of time with it because of its action focus, but it's all there. If you're looking for if D100 is your thing and you want a pretty easy D100 approach, I think Covert Ops could be a good way to go. Yeah, so let's keep going. So next up is going to be one that probably a lot more people are familiar with, and that's Delta Green. Now, Delta Green, for some people, we're looking at boom. I showed you the blank side. Delta Green, slipcase, got the little triangle. Delta Green, for a lot of people, as far as like Cthulhu espionage games go, is in modern settings, is the big one. And there's a lot of good things here. It's D100. It's very Call of Cthulhu-y, which is fine. Call of Cthulhu is not my maybe favorite, but this game has some great adventures for it. It's another D100 system. It's going to be a little bit more old school in variety. I'm trying to get a character sheet just so you can get an idea. Strength, constitution, dexterity, intelligence, power, charisma, like classic BRP Cthulhu. You got your starting percentages next to your skills. Again, feels very Cthulhu, but you start to see the tweaks like SIGINT, HUMINT, getting a little bit going on there. But what this game does is it's got some really great adventures for it. It's got a really great setting. And the idea is that you're playing basically federal agents that get brought into Delta Green to combat the sort of secret war against the monsters, the Cthulhu, the whatever. So you've got for part of character creation, FBI, DEA, ICE, Marshal Service, Navy, Air Force, Marine, Special Ops. So this game's got a ton of support. There's a lot of material out there. Quinn's Quest, I'm going to write this down, did a review of this. But the reason why he did a review of this is because he wanted to review the adventure. And he said it was one of the best adventures he's ever run. And I think that's the trick. I think Delta Green might not be the most inspired system, but it is Cthulhu, so you're probably going to be pretty familiar with it. But what they do with this system, the setting, the adventures, some of it's supposed to be really great. And so that in and of itself might be. And then the other thing that this one does is I thought their sanity system was good because, in Cthulhu, that's one of the things that's a little, it's just like, your sanity track goes down to 0. Here, again, you have things that will lower your sanity score, 1d8, 1d6, whatever. But I thought there was ways to, there's a lot of, megalomania, phobias, amnesia. There's a lot of things here, permanent insanity, resisting insanity. Okay. You get hardened. But here's the thing that was interesting. You project onto a bond. When your agent loses sanity, you may spend willpower points to reduce the loss. It's always 1d4. And then what you do is you push that onto relationships that you have. And that's kind of a thing with this style of fiction, like John le Carré's spies, like say the spy who came from the cold, can't remember the main character, but like he gets involved with a woman during whatever's going on, and he's drinking all the time. The relationships are crumbling. Same with George Smiley, one of his main characters. His wife left him. He's always dealing with that. So somehow the job takes a toll. And even if you don't want it because of sanity loss, there are things that might not be monster related that could reduce your sanity that you would need to then have it affect your have it affect your life. So I really appreciated that kind of take on it that I felt like could be used regardless of the game. I thought it really captured the sanity systems that you might sort of get hinted at in Cold War espionage fiction, the way like people break down or fall apart or turn to the bottle or whatever it is, or like have a moment of weakness. I thought it was a nice touch. And like I was saying, Delta Green is probably one of the biggest on this list. It's got really great adventures. Again, I'll try and link to whatever the Quinn's Quest review is of that adventure. Don't watch the review if you want to play it, because he flat out warns you, like, I'm going to spoil the crap out of this. So, but it gives you an overview of Delta Green if you want something more specific. Maybe not the most mind-blowing system in the world, but some really great stuff out there. And it's got VTT support, which is not always the case. I don't think any of the games, Savage Worlds for Tuxedos and Trenchcoats, you could do. The other ones, I don't know if D100 Lite has a 3rd edition D&D has VTT support, so like Spycraft, but that's one of the tricks. If VTT support is part of your thing, there's not going to be, that's what limited me in the end. So, but yeah, Delta Green, very much like a big one in this space. Obviously, it focuses on the Cthulhu stuff, but absolutely worth checking out. So what's up next? This is the one, I already talked about this because I thought it was when I was looking at a second ago, and this is going to be 00. So 00 is a pretty light D100 espionage game. The way this works, it even says why 00, and they mention here, for a brief shining moment in the 1980s, there was an officially licensed role-playing game based on Britain's most famous secret agent. Again, a lot of love for that original Victory game, James Bond RPG. And, they were inspired. So this one's a little bit, it says 00 is a system built upon the open game content and open game license provided by Daniel Proctor's Gore. So if you know that Gore, I don't, but it's not intended to be an emulation of basic role-playing or BRP compatible. But basically what it is you get like your skills, you multiply them by a certain number depending on how hard the check is. So if you got a skill of 10, if it's a hard check, you just try and roll a 10. If it's above standard, you're trying to roll a 20, and below a 20 standard, you're below 30, below 40, below 50. That's basically it. There's other modifiers that will affect you before you start doing the multiplication. But that's basically it. You have like a 3d6 for your attributes, and then you just multiply it, and then you're off to the races. And then depending on how many multiples above your target you get. So like say you had a 10 and you're trying to roll a 30. Say you have a 10 and the difficulty standard, so you're trying to roll below a 30 and you roll below a 10. Because you were 2 steps down, you get sort of 2 steps of outcome improvement. And maybe it goes the other way as well. I think it's only, no, this is good. So yeah, so that sort of thing. So what this does is, despite being light, it might get a little mathy in the moment when you're trying to and again, like a 10 is not crazy, but it's like 14 times 4 is 56. But are you going to remember? I mean, in your head, you can do this, but like if you're playing with like maybe younger people, it might be a little much. Like 13 is not a number that a lot of people multiply often. But so you're going to be like trying to figure out like, wait, did I get 2 steps below? Is that, oh, wait, what's the math? So I could see in the moment it getting a little mathy. So despite being simple in writing it down, maybe in executions, maybe not the craziest, but otherwise, yeah, straight up D100, spending some points here and there. And it's just like and again, this might be your thing, right? Like, it's sort of what I was thinking. I was like, I just want something, like, I just want a framework to hang my, my adventure on. Like, I don't need it to be full of Delta Green lore. I don't, because that's the strength of Delta Green, is all the lore and stuff like that. Because I'm trying to run a specific thing that's not Delta Green. Like, I don't need the stuff. I just need, espionage, check skills, make characters, a few weapons maybe, and just a way to tell the story. And I feel like this does that. And, it sort of gears it a little bit toward you getting some of the same things that you saw in the classified James Bond, the tables for height and weight and stuff like that. Yeah. So I feel like if you're looking for like a pretty streamlined D100, you got it. This does it without a ton of lore. Just bring it into what you're trying to do and go from there. So that's 00. Let's see what's up next. I think this is going to be one that a lot of people also recognize. And that is The Fall of Delta Green. Now, The Fall of Delta Green is right there. Fall of Delta Green is part of the Delta Green family that we, looked at a second ago, but this is based on the Gumshoe engine. You can see right from the cover, it's, 1960s Vietnam. Cthulhu's taking out a helicopter. But what I liked about this was that it brought a lot of what I liked about Delta Green into the 1960s. Because again, I was like, how much legwork do I need to do to retrofit Delta Green from its modern setting to like a different time? Also, a lot of people really like Fall of Delta Green on its own. So I was just kind of curious to take a look at it. And it does a lot of good stuff. Like, if you like Gumshoe, basically like you're spending points to get clues. And so there's a lot of management of that kind of stuff. It's got a ton of lore. Again, like the Delta Green stuff really brings it with the lore in terms of combining espionage with the Cthulhu aspects. I will say this. Gumshoe is almost the direction I went. I've never run Gumshoe, and I'm a little nervous about it. Like the idea of like spending to gather clues. Like, a lot of people swear by it for investigation games. And let's be honest, like a Trenchcoat style Le Carré espionage is going to be an investigation. It's going to be sort of a mystery. And so I felt like, oh, maybe that would work, but I can't see it, so to speak. And I feel like if I played it first, I could say like, oh yeah, okay, now I get it. I see. But I've never played it. So it's a little tricky in that regard because I don't know. I just don't know. And I didn't want my first time running espionage, something I've been dying to do, to also be the first time I ran Gumshoe and sort of like fighting with the system in case I didn't get it, or getting disappointed if I like, oh, actually this mechanic isn't quite what I wanted. But Fall of Delta Green sort of brings things into the 60s, but it's actually not really the best way to maybe get Gumshoe adapted to that Le Carré style game. And let's get into what that might actually be. If I can bring it over here, find it. Here we go. Now, interestingly enough, you would think this would be the way in. And I think this game, let me just double check before I click out of it. Let me just see if they talk about I'm not going to hunt for it too long. I didn't know if they talked about like different types of adventures, because I think this one it's pretty hardcore into Cthulhu mythos. So let's just move on. Here we go. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit to Night's Black Agents. Now, if you know Night's Black Agents, that is like an espionage action game where you fight vampires. So it's sort of like, imagine like Mission Impossible meets, vampires, and that's what you got. But they also offered this expansion book called Night's Black Agent Double Tap. And this game, what's interesting about it is that it says, hey, do you want to take the vampires and everything out of it? Let's walk you through it. And what they have is these variant eras. So they tell you like, hey, if it's in the Victoria era, change these things. If you want telegraphy, change this, and so World War II, sort of do this. If you want into the Cold War, maybe make data retrieval instead of data recovery and tweak this skill that way. And, digital intrusion is not yet available. So you want to look at this that way. And so they sort of guide you through how to make Gumshoe into, an espionage game set during different eras. And I thought they also talked about how just taking the vampires out entirely. And I'm trying to remember where that is, because I remember looking at that somewhere. And they have rules for solitary heroes. Yeah, I think the Gumshoe, they have rules for like if you only have like a one-on-one, one GM, one player. I think they have ways to adapt a lot of stuff. And then the other thing that Gumshoe style games have, I just swore there was something about pulling. I know it says pulling them apart, but I don't think that's what I think it is. But the other thing they have is they have a system for like telling stories, like the Cis Pyramid. There's sort of like a lot of Gumshoe, they have this way of like diagramming stories or campaigns to help you, create your stories and, come up with things and keep it like correct, so to speak, in terms of the genre. And I think a lot of people swear by this pyramid structure to designing stories. Now, again, I could have swore somewhere in here was a way like, hey, and if you don't want to play with vampires, don't do it. That maybe that's in the original game, but anyway, so Night's Black Agent, ironically, and Double Tap together might be the way to go if you're looking to run Gumshoe espionage over Fall of Delta Green if you're trying to get rid of the supernatural. So who's to say? Or just run in Fall of Delta Green. Who cares? Okay, so we did that. So now we're going to get into, we talked about Savage Worlds. Why not GURPS? GURPS Espionage. I've got a printed version right here. GURPS Espionage. GURPS is, again, it's a generic universal role-playing system. That's what GURPS, I think, stands for. And it's point buy, but it's very granular. Very granular. So it's why I would choose, if I was going to do that kind of work, Savage Worlds over GURPS. Because Savage Worlds is a little less granular, a little bit easier in my mind to bang into shape from its moving pieces. But GURPS has it. And, the great thing about GURPS is they're supplemental books. And while this book, the book is a really great overview for espionage. If you're really into espionage, you probably already sort of know this stuff, or it's not going to be that insightful. But if you're just like dipping your toe, like, oh, this seems like it would be an interesting thing. Let me get a vibe check and see what it's like. That's what this does. It sort of breaks down like, tons of broad strokes in terms of intelligence organizations, gives you like spook talk, which is just like, to add flavor to your stuff, the type of campaign you might want to run. Like, I already had that in mind, but if you're like, I want to run a spy game, but I don't really know where to start, that's kind of what this book is. And so if you're already familiar with GURPS, then you can sort of bang it into shape and you can start like doing a lot of the heavy lifting you need to do to get GURPS off the ground. But then once you get it off the ground, my understanding, then it's not that bad. Like a lot of these systems, heavy point buy. And this book, I think, is meant to sort of be a companion piece to, I think they have like a special ops book, which would introduce the more action elements to it. So like if you're looking to run Mission Impossible style, it might help to have special ops and espionage to sort of play off each other. But one thing I thought that was interesting was this little how to role play a spy. Like, because spy, what they say is you're role playing a character that's already role playing. Whether you're doing deep covers where you're lying to people. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Sort of interesting. Yeah, the special ops rulebook contains rules for characters up to 400 points. But yeah, anyway. You can do like cinematic spies, cutouts. Again, it's just broad overviews, femme fatales, Mickey the walk-in spy. So yeah, it's just like a really nice like potential starting point if you're like, I'm interested in espionage, but I'm not like me. I've read tons of Le Carré. I've read Tom Clancy. I've read Len Dayton. I've read Frederick Forsyth. I've read, a lot of these styles of books. So, but this is like a really nice overview to ground it. But you can see like some advantages now that they add to the GURPS system, things like that. So they give you some ways to tweak it to get GURPS sort of more in line. But yeah, so GURPS is not maybe I've played in GURPS. I've never run GURPS. Sometimes I'm curious about it, running it, but I would never, I think, want to do the amount of work it needs to get off the ground. And that might be my misunderstanding, having never run it. Maybe it's not that bad, but there you go. So GURPS is an option. Let's open up the next one here we go. Minutes to Midnight. Okay, so this one I really like, if it's the one I'm thinking of. Minutes to Midnight, I think, is Forged in the Dark. Yeah, it's a Forged in the Dark game. We had Cold Shadows as sort of like a pretty rules light story focused. This is the Forged in the Dark version of, which is often like the classic storytelling collaborative kind of stuff. Really easy to get into. If you know the Forged in the Dark stuff, you can get into this no problem. Clocks are... am I thinking of the right game? Yeah, Forged in the Dark. Where's the... Yeah, it's basically, yeah, if it gives you some basic information to get you off the ground. Again, it's a nice broad overview of the like Mossad, Stasi, MSS, KGB, so I was hoping it would give you the... Oh, no, because I'm thinking of a different... So yeah, so it's basically, if you want to... And Forged in the Dark has a lot of fans. People really like the idea of it. And this is a great way to get Forged in the Dark going. And I almost went with this as well, but I didn't, because I didn't know how much control... I was nervous how much control the players would have in the narrative, which I probably shouldn't be afraid of, having now run through some stuff. But that's why I didn't lean into it so much, is because in my head, that's what Forged in the Dark could be. But yeah, you've got the Cold War. Your doomsday clock represents the pressure, paranoia, and tension that builds up between factions as your PCs try to achieve their goals. So yeah, you set your doomsday clock to start at 3 minutes to midnight. And again, that's sort of the idea of like how close we were to nuclear war in the Cold War. Yeah, anyway. Yeah, if you hit midnight, the game ends and you roll your dice equal to the number of crises resolved in your favor. So it might be a little bit, also it might have been a little bit broader. I'm not sure if you're resolving crises the way each crisis is a heist, and maybe you do a couple per session. I don't know. But yeah, so Minutes to Midnight is Forged in the Dark for spies. So going on to another sort of generic system here. We're going to bust out Berlin 1961. This book can be tough to find in hardcover, but I think it's available on Drivethru RPG. And you can see it's BURP. It's basic role-playing. BRP, it's the expansion for that. Again, it focuses on Berlin in 1961, which is kind of like the perfect Cold War setting. And this is a great, much like the espionage book for GURPS, this is a great sort of, it's a great way to get into this style of game. They give you different types of games, strange sounds, behind the wall, feint within a feint. And then they definitely, this one doesn't have bookmarks the way the others do. Ways to sort of like, hey, blue books, scripts, handouts, kind of, different tips to how you might want to run this kind of game, the types of people you might encounter, thugs, henchmen, lackeys, key locations of Berlin. So this is a really good, the way like Cold City had a breakdown of Berlin. Some of it was geared towards its lore with the supernatural. This is just historical. Like they're not trying to do anything beyond this is what's there. So this is like a great insight into Berlin in 61, which might help you, ground your game. Again, similar to Cold City, you get a overview with the different sectors. A little more specific with the Berlin Wall, Brandenburg Gate, Checkpoint Charlie, all grounded in reality. So you're getting like the legit real stuff if that's what you're looking for. Now, again, like Odessa, Argentinian tourists, stuff that was going on. But so BRP, if you're not familiar with it, is a D100 system. Call of Cthulhu, I think, is an offshoot of BRP, or they're all offshoots of RuneQuest. I don't know how it worked. Mithras, they all have like roots. So if you know, BRP is sort of like where a lot of that started, just a classic D100 system. You're multiplying shit by 5 to get your other things, and just classic stuff. Now this game, and so I didn't use BRP, but I looked at this source book a lot for reference material. They just had I don't know if they changed much, but like within the last couple of years, like a new printing of BRP came out, and I probably have the PDF somewhere, and I thought they did a really good job. So BRP is absolutely like a great generic system, to work with. So if that's your thing, if you like D100, definitely check out BRP, and then grab yourself Berlin 61. It's going to give you, I apologize. Again, you're going to see, the Nazi flag because it's part of the time period, I guess. But this is the interesting thing. They felt like they needed to add a hook, right? And I get it, because if they want to make like, hey, it's generic, but if you wanted to compete with Delta Green, I guess we got to put it in there. So they add like a mythos section. And it sort of made me wonder, like, man, is this really what most people are actually looking for in their espionage games? Because I was like, it seems to be something that keeps coming up. And it's, again, like, I don't like aliens in my sci-fi. Like, I'm not looking for this, but it keeps, like, they felt like they had to do a whole section on it just to have it. So it must be a big deal. But yeah, so again, if you want BRP with the full works, including like horror lore, Berlin 61 will get you there. So yeah, like I said, it's a little bit hard to come across in physical form, but I think it's on Drivethru and it's not too hard to get the PDF. So, I do like D100. And like I said, I referenced this book quite a bit when I was thinking about what I ran. I ended up going with Mithras as my D100 core. It's offshoot, just because there's little things about it that I was more familiar with, but they're all sort of in the same vein. So let's see what we got next. Oh, this next one's interesting. Snakes and Wolves is basically like a really, really rules light, maybe PBTA almost, game that is Metal Gear Solid. So it's not quite espionage, but it's in that ballpark. You got your verbs, your nouns. To create an operative, choose these things: special training, a code name, background, and finally a real name. Your inventory is your trademark, bandana, cigarettes. So you can see, like, just it's Metal Gear Solid, just through and through. And it's super rules light. I think we're almost through the end of this. Yeah, like 10, 11 pages of rules. Yeah, you're rolling a D10, so it's when you roll a 10 on a challenge roll and you succeed, you get 1 point, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so you're trying to build like a little bit of a dice pool. You use a verb that's been clarified. So it's like choosing a noun and a verb from your character. And if you can do that, you get a couple of dice. You're trying to, beat a 10, whatever. Or you're trying to, who knows what. Oh, here's the challenge level, 4, 6, 8, 10. Okay. 2. Very rules light. But I thought it was kind of cute. I know Matt's a huge fan, or I think he's a huge fan of like the old Metal Gear Solid games. So yeah, anyway, we won't spend too much time on that, but now we're going to move on to the next one, and we're going to go back to, I probably should have done this together with the other one earlier, but Secret Files of Section D goes back to Savage Worlds, the Adventure Edition. And it basically, Tuxedos and Trenchcoats was very much espionage, but it was more action, James Bond, modern day. Section D is like World War II espionage, like maybe like, French resistance kind of stuff, but there's also the supernatural. So this is very pulpy. It's World War II espionage. I think Section D, is that part of the United States? Or was it British? I forget what, but that was sort of like a real kind of thing. Maybe that's how they ran like resistance ops in like France and Belgium. I don't know. But yeah, it's very much a pulp take. You see like, Nazi UFOs. So it's very much that. It's leaning into all the pulpiness you expect from Savage Worlds, but it gives you, the reason why I sort of looked at it is because it gave you a way to sort of tailor it to the time period. So, because I see Savage Worlds as a toolkit, I was like, okay, I could borrow this and I could shape it the way this sort of suggests you shape it. And then the other thing is I thought actually this might be an interesting way, like one of the games I really like, and I've talked about it here with Patrick, is Deus Vult. It's a setting where it takes place like, around the time of the Crusades, and you play, warrior monks who battle evil. And the evil is sort of inspired in my head by the computer game Darklands, which is all like stuff that sort of was lore and legend of the time mixed in with like religious superstition to create like the evil in the backdrop of the setting. And I felt like, if I ever wanted to sort of like do a modern setting in World War II, because I adapted Deus Vult to Savage Worlds, I'm like, I could just, rename the monsters and now they're whatever. Anyway, that's sort of why I also gravitated towards this. But yeah, so Section D, Secret Files of Section D, espionage role-playing a world on the brink of war. Again, I thought it took place during World War II, but maybe the war is not quite popped off yet. I don't know. But they do have, let's see, campaign styles. They have the pulp campaign. I was curious because they do have like the espionage campaign. And I don't know where. But yeah, you can see like using cards to randomly generate items of power. Again, that's pulpy like the, the Ark of the Covenant and Indiana Jones. But the espionage campaign, it's not quite as fantastic as a pulp campaign and less realistic than the military one, but more glamorous and cinematic. So the one I was actually looking at, I thought it was this, but maybe it's the military campaign because military campaign, there are rules that make things a little grittier. It's the more realistic version. And the special ops executive, blah, blah, blah. So it does let you sort of shape it a little bit and might lean away from the pulpiness a bit. And I was kind of curious about that because, again, I keep telling myself like it doesn't have to be that. So anyway, so that's this that's the Secret Files of Section D. Again, another Savage World. I should have brought it up when we did Tuxedos and Trenchcoats, but there you go. So what's next? This next one. Top Secret New World Order. Top Secret goes back, I think it's TSR's take on the espionage game from the 80s, along with James Bond from the 80s. I think those are the two that people, like old school gamers, really gravitated toward. New World Order was sort of like a reimagining, a new edition of it. And man, I really want to like this because I like Savage Worlds. You know, I've been playing some Blade Runner recently, and that has like dice stepping mechanics as like a big thing. You know, Blade Runner is a Free League Year Zero engine, but instead of using the D6 dice pools, it uses D6, D8, D10, D12s as a different, and you go up and down between the dice and blah, blah, blah. This has a lot of those things. You know, it's got like, you know, your stats are either like a D4, D6, D8, D10, D12. That's very Savage Worldsy. It's very crunchy. There's a lot of things here. Like I was reading through it initially. I'm like, I feel like this should have taken off more. Like there's a lot here. It's very crunchy, very detailed. Like if, you know, it has like, I think the original was D100. So there's a lot more, there's some D100 stuff that creeps in, like, you know, your impairments and stuff like that. Impairments, much like other like point-based kind of things. If you take an impairment, you get more bonuses to spend in your character, the way like GURPS, Savage Worlds, they all do that kind of thing. But I think it has like this sort of step system, D4, D6, D8, D20, that I think they managed to implement decently across like everything. You know, it does a really good job using that core idea to like go back and forth between difficulties. But there's some sloppiness. Like part of me was like, I don't understand why this didn't take off more. And then I started to see some like typos and stuff like that. And it's like, okay, so it didn't have like maybe the tightest grasp on some of the quality control, but I really feel like there's just, it's like if you took Savage Worlds and you tailored it specifically to an espionage game, and then you just piled a bunch more stuff on it, more skills, more this, more that, more systems, more everything. Just it's a lot more detailed. And again, like stepping dice between the two, or, you know, like using, like you basically the core mechanics, you're trying to beat a 13 and you create a dice pool depending on something. And then you roll those dice that, you know, depending on what they are. And if you beat a 13, you beat it. But what's also interesting is if like you get enough critical failures and stuff like that, that 13, you know, the tension rises. That 13 then becomes a 14, and that 14 then becomes a 15. And so things can get harder like that. But if you have like a lot of really good successes, you can bring that tension down. Tension might not be the right word, but you can bring that difficulty down because you're sort of regaining control of the narrative and the momentum because you've, you know, pulled off some great successes to, you know, get things back under control and stop it from spinning away from you. Trying to like, so yeah, like even like, you know, it's got like a way to use like dice for buying stuff depending on how expensive it is. I'll show you though, like one of the, okay, so slippery fluid, if you get it, you know, location damage for slippery fluid, it tells you what it does. It's a D100, eliminates friction with floor. But then you have sticky foam, which in theory should do the exact opposite, right? But if you go to the table, eliminates friction with floor ground, it's the same table, I think. So I feel like this should be different. Like it should have the same locations, and it probably has a lot of similarities of loss of sense of smell, deafness. Maybe it doesn't, I don't know. But it's clear like the table was copy and pasted and they didn't, you know, so it's things like that. Every once in a while you run into something like that. But I do feel like, yeah. And so like, let's get into like, okay, lucky 13 bursts and blowback. So if you roll the highest number on the die, it sort of explodes, very much like Savage Worlds. If you roll a 1 on one of the dice, very much like in Savage Worlds, it's a critical failure. And that's going to shift the tension track. Every 3 shifts on the tension track, I think, increase that difficulty from like a 13 to a 14. I think that's how it works. Yeah, so there's, you know, it's a lot of stuff like that. You know, the decision die table, again, so instead of like, you know, this is a difficulty of -4, what you can do is either from assets or gear or a decision die, you get like a bonus die to your roll. So you're usually like trying to roll like 3 dice. One might be your attribute, one might be a skill, and one might be either gear, an asset helping you, or a decision die. So if the GM is like, hey, like this is a heroic task, I'm not going to give you any help. If it's extraordinary, you only get a D4, challenging a D6, D8, D10, D12. So like if it's a moderate task, you're going to roll your attribute, you might roll some gear, and then you'll get a D10 because that's the decision die. Now, if you have an asset or something else that's going to help you, you swap that in for the decision die. So if you have like the right tool for the job, or if you have an asset who's a scientist who knows that exact thing, that's going to take the place of the decision die. But again, like I just thought it was a really interesting, but I guess here it's also like, but then you're raising, lowering difficulty. So there's other ways. So maybe it starts to get a little convoluted. Like, is it this? Is it that? Is it both? But had this had VTT support, I think I would have gone with this, and I would have just rolled with the punches. Even if it took me a little bit, because I really like the similarities it has to systems I genuinely really like. I think the way it pushes up and down with the dice, it's kind of consistently throughout everything, whether it's, it's never like a +2 to your roll. They find ways to make everything be a step up or a step down in some version. Like some aspect of it is doing that. Combat though might be, like Savage Worlds, you get like 3 actions. This goes with like an action point system, but like if you're spending like 12 points and, aiming fire a large gun is 12. So it might get a little crunchy in that sense. It might be a little bit too much. Like how far you can run depends on your die type. But again, like it's really interesting how they incorporate that step dice into everything, but it's incorporated into everything. And so it might be too much. I would have been really curious to try it. And I couldn't get VTT support, but even with like little things like seeing that same table printed twice, like I feel like there's a lot here that could be really interesting. Like even like torture, like becomes like because like everybody's like, yeah, torture doesn't really work. So they, it gives you an advantage, but it gives your opposed role person an advantage because they're going to be like, F you, I'm not telling you. What happens if you use drugs? They have mechanics for parachuting. That's like a 5-step process, like exiting the plane, you do a roll, then you have to do this for a roll, the free fall, the shoot, pull, it's all these different things. Viking wrestling, again, a lot of detail, a lot of crunch, a lot of nuance. I feel like it could have been really interesting, and I hope somebody to still run it, even though for my Cold War espionage, I have my own thing going on. So, which maybe I'll get into a little bit, maybe I won't. But anyway, so yeah, Top Secret: The New World Order was sort of a redo of the classic Top Secret, which people still hunt down on eBay. Maybe it's on Drivethru in its old form. I don't know, but this came and went in a way that I think is a little disappointing. I feel like this game deserved more attention, and I might be just biased because I love Savage Worlds and those kind of step mechanics so much. So that's Top Secret: New World Order. All right, so up next is, I think, another generic-y system. Violation of Truth, 2d6 adventure in a world of secret and spies. So this is going to be in the... This product is derived from the Traveler System reference document. The Mongoose First Edition Traveler is an open gaming license. If you're following the Hostile solo playthrough we're doing here on the channel, that's Cepheus Engine. Cepheus Engine, of course, is... Oh, it says right here, Cepheus Engine. Cepheus Engine is that First Edition Mongoose open game license. 2d6 system. I really like the 2d6 system. It's one I have not played enough of, and it's one I don't think I've ever run, and I want to. Especially in the... I mean, I've run it with Hostile solo, but I haven't run it with players. The 2d6 system is it's a really clean, generic system that I think is very flexible. What I was saying earlier, if you just want like a framework to hang your adventure on, like, I don't need the lore, I don't need all that stuff, I feel like the 2d6 systems really do a good job with that. They're relatively simple. With some of those things I was describing, I think in 00, like, did I beat it by enough steps to... Here it's very clear, like, your target number is a 10. Did you beat it by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Like that gives you your success levels. The math is very easy on that. it brings, what I liked about this is that it, reduced a lot of stuff into human int, which is classic espionage, tech int. And it has life paths. Again, the whole thing people like about Travelers, the life path system, this does that. So yeah, and it's just, again, it's a very clean, very simple, generic espionage thing. If you're just looking for a way to check some skills and shoot a gun every now and then, like, this has got you covered. I really like the 2d6 system. The VTT specifically, the 2d6 system that covers Cepheus on Foundry, at least, is amazing. Genuinely amazing. So, man, I wonder how hard it would be to convert Top Secret New World Order just to Savage Worlds. I mean, it's so close in so many ways, but I feel like you lose a lot of the stuff that makes it all that die stepping as opposed to just +2, +4. But yeah, anyway, 2d6, the VTT support on that is absolutely fantastic. And so if you're just looking for a quick way to get into it, like, boom, you could just input this data and you'd be off to the races. You'd be off to the races. It'd be really easy. So I am a huge fan of this. This was another one I almost went with only because I want to run 2d6 so badly. But in the end, I went with my own homebrew of Mithras. And then finally, we're at the end of the ones I am going to do a quick overview of. And that's White Lies. White Lies, a role-playing game about doing bad things for good reasons. I don't know if it's necessarily, oh yeah, it is espionage. I was going to say, or is it more like pulp? This is OSR. So if you like the OSR, the revival going on with those, if you like old school essentials, if you like that style of game, really like BX, like old school D&D, got you covered here. Saving throws, again, like, to me, that just feels weird. But if that's the style of game you want, this has got it. You're going to be covered. Armor class, so I'm not a huge fan of that style of game. I don't know it super well, so I don't want to talk about too much detail, but just know, like, the spy game has you covered with the 5e, Spycraft has you covered with 3e, and White Lies has you covered if you're looking for OSR. Base hit bonus, again, it feels all weird, but it's here. And, I know a lot of people who like OSR style games, and I feel like they would be able to make the argument that it's more flexible than you realize. Because they'll say right here, as we present in chapter 4, there's no limit to the types of campaigns which are possible with this game. And it's true. Like, it might not strike me as the way to go, but yeah, I mean, does system matter? It's a question we ask all the time. People keep saying yes. They're all drunk. No, I don't know. But yeah, so you know what you're saying. So, like, if that's what you're comfortable with, if that's the sort of framework you and your players understand, here's an easy way to just jump right in and get going. So, so for me, like I said, I ran my game with Mithras. Mithras, if Delta Green had character sheets in Foundry VTT that I could customize, I might have just done Delta Green. I'm glad, though, it didn't, because it was a nice exercise to sort of think about it. And it's got me thinking about, like, hey, if I were ever to more officially codify what I'm trying to do, it might be an interesting exercise to try that. And with that, I've started looking at different engines. I don't think I'm going to stick with Mithras, but I've started doing some tweaking and tinkering and some typing to, see what happens with that and see if anything comes from it. And when we get that back to the rotation, I'll debut it with the stuff I've been working on. So there you go. It's a bit of an overview. I ran a little longer than I thought, especially since the first time OBS crashed. But maybe my computer woes are not entirely over, which is disappointing, but so be it. Anyway, this has been Black Lodge Trivia Night. I'm Art. Appreciate everybody who's been checking this out. I hope this was fun in some capacity. Again, a lot of this came about like when I was trying to set up my role-playing game, my espionage game. This is the research I did. And that's why it's not exhaustive in any way as reviews or as a list, but this is the stuff I came across doing my research. And I thought maybe, it'd be nice to have it out there sort of compiled for anybody who might be curious. So thanks again to everybody. Check this out. Looking forward to what's coming in 2026 when we get Patrick back eventually. Matt and I will hopefully continue our Blade Runner, get the rotation back up and running. That's always my New Year's resolution is, can we, do well by that in terms my resolutions as far as the channel goes. But otherwise, yeah, thanks to everybody who's checking this out. If you prefer audio versions of this, search for Black Lodge Trivia Night where you get your podcast. We should show up. We have a Discord if you want to jump in and chat about RPGs, CRPGs, whatever you want, that kind of stuff. And again, I hope you had a happy holiday season. I hope you have a good 2026. I'm hoping I have a good 2026. Start clawing my way back in a little bit. But we really, really appreciate everybody who checks this stuff out, and we hope you're doing well. So thanks again. Take care. Bye-bye.